So we talk a lot about landlords and tenants, and we're focusing on landlord clients. And part of that, I suppose the reason for that is that we we are dealing with lease agreements, and in a lease agreement, the relationship that we're dealing with is the landlord-tenant relationship that we're managing in terms of the lease agreement. But if you think about it, investors, people who intentionally invest in properties, intentionally own more than one property, for returns, for capital gains, and all those gobbledygook keywords, are really our ideal clients because often they have multiple properties, etc. And as opposed to them, landlords can include what I call the accidental landlords, not intentional landlords. They they could potentially be transferred to another place and they have to move house. And so for that reason, they are renting out the property. So the intention was never really to rent out the property. And I've had a number of questions from members asking me about, and I'm just going to call this investor speak, landlord. No, let's not. I'm going to stop using this word landlord. Investor speak, and that sort of thing. The language that investors speak, and some of the common terms. Somebody asked me saying the other day about a Section 14 something, which I really don't know what it is. But then people also talk about return on investment, etc. So I thought what we would do, seeing that we are building up a library of information, is speak to somebody that deals with investors a lot. And that is where I asked, and Bruno fortunately agreed to join us this morning, Bruno Simão, who is the founder and the CEO of Bruno Simão Attorneys, and I think also Intergen, and Bruno will be able to explain to us better as soon as I stop rattling off like this. But also, more importantly, he deals a lot. He's got an affiliation with the South African Property Investors Network that he's very involved in. So he deals with investors a lot. And I believe he's also an investor himself. Bruno, good morning. Good morning.
Hi, Shaun. Hi, Shaun. It's good to hear from you. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're most welcome. And somehow my keyboard went a little bit crazy this morning. And whenever I press the button, all sorts of funny other things happen. But we are very happy that we've got you here. And you and I do talk reasonably often about things. So when we
It's
talk
been averaging every day now, by the way.
well, actually, yes, more than once a day, even. You're quite right. But that's great because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
When we talk a lot about landlords and tenants, as I've just mentioned. And we use this word because in terms of the lease, it is a landlord because they're renting it out and the act calls it a landlord and blah, blah, blah. But I think sometimes using that terminology, and I'm super, super guilty of it, using that terminology makes us think differently than focusing on investors. Investors are really the people out there who are buying properties to rent out, to get an income for capital growth, all those sorts of things. So I've had a few questions about these things. And I remember the last one. Actually, I think I remember, I might have it totally wrong. So it's like about, Shaun, do you have a course? Do you have training on the language? What they didn't call it that, but what things like, I think they said a Section 10 or a Section 14 or something like that. I don't know if that rings a bell to you. But then they also talk about things like return on investment, etc. Would you explain to us how you interact with investors? Because I know you start from the beginning of their journey, how they set up their investment strategy, how they set up their vehicle, and share with us what you think the most important things are that agents need to know to target investors, clients, and to bond with them and to link with them. I may change my internet connection because it told me it was getting a bit weak at some point while we carry on, but I'm going to hand it over to you. And of course, I'll help you with any questions help you read any questions that come in. So I'm going to hand over to you to explain it to us in plain English.
No worries. Do you mind giving me permission to share the screen? I did put a few slides together.
Sorry, I just want to say that I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. Can you tell me, is it just on my side that Bruno's freezing up, or is he freezing up on your side too?
So Shaun, you just froze now, and I don't think it's on my side because I have quite a solid connection.
Okay.
Yeah. But I did suggest if you don't mind giving me permission to share, I did
Oh, of
prepare a couple of
course.
slides for your viewers.
Of course. My sincerest apologies. Let me just uh
No worries.
I
Okay,
just
so while you're doing that, maybe let me just briefly. So Shaun has introduced me, and I think he's done a fantastic job introducing me. Thank you so much. But just to give you context into like why I feel qualified, as it were, to actually have a conversation around this topic, is so obviously as an attorney, um, I deal a lot in the legal space, answer a lot of questions, a lot of problems, that sort of thing. But that doesn't actually qualify anyone, to be honest. I know plenty of attorneys that wouldn't know the first thing about investments. The reason why I am qualified, or I find, or I have the credibility to have a conversation around this, is because most of my clients are business people, and business people in the property space are either business owners that run business, property related businesses like estate agents or engineers or whatever the case is, or property investors, again, business people. And I think that, and I'll go through the slides now as soon as I can, but
sorry, you have sharing ability. I didn't want to interrupt you.
no worries. So I think it is screen 3. So this is what happens when I have multiple screens. I have to kind of hope that I hit the right one. There we go.
There we are. We speak in the investor's language. That's the one we want.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, so as an attorney, my specialization, I started off in litigation, and litigation taught me a lot about seeing problems, about analyzing problems and trying to find solutions to these, and actually convince a court that there is a problem, that there isn't a problem, that our client's right, that the other person's wrong. It's very confrontational. And obviously with that sort of background in the commercial space, it really does help because it builds up this reserve of knowledge of problems that you experience on a day-to-day basis, that when you work in the commercial space, and when I say commercial, guys, I'm not speaking about necessarily commercial properties, I'm speaking about business. And you'll see from my first slide that this is a very important distinction that we need to make. But now, again, taking a step back, my job is making deals happen. I speak to one party, I speak to the other party, I negotiate, I put the deals together, I structure the affairs, I look at the tax consequences, I look at the structuring consequences, I help the owners set up their own structures, whether it's through trusts or through companies with holding companies and this and that and the other, the whole array. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, these type of structures, and you wonder why they exist. And the reason they exist, again, is to service the business person, to service the investor. And that's my function at the moment. So I've got the litigation background. I've got a litigation team that currently deals with all my litigation. I've got conveyancing that deals with all my conveyancing. So how am I a property attorney? I'm a property attorney, not in the normal sense where I go out and do conveyancing or go out and do evictions. I'm a property attorney because I run a business that deals with property people. I've got this infrastructure to support them, but I make the deals happen and I close the deals. And that's my background. And that is why I am qualified to speak about the investment space and the investor and what they're looking for, especially in the property space. And so you'll see from the first slide here that, first of all, we're speaking about mindset. And all of us need to take a step back away from this. This applies to both sales agents and leasing agents, because unfortunately, when dealing with residential property, we approach the property in exactly the same way. If we were selling it to a person that wants to live on the property versus selling it to a person that wants to rent the property out, we've been speaking to them all this time in the very same way, and we assume that this is the correct way of doing it. The problem is that maybe in the past, a couple of years ago, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, a person could get away with it because, there were fewer investors. It was a smaller percentage of people used to have second houses, right? And because of that, Those people knew what they wanted. Their agent came in, they knew what to ask the agent. They didn't expect the agent to give them a lot. They knew what to look for. They got it out and they went forward and either invested in the property or not. So the agent acted simply as a bridge, but the agent for them didn't close the deal in reality, to be honest. They brought the deal, but the investor looked at all the parameters, assessed it, did the study, and then decided themselves whether the deal was worth it or not, right? We're living in a very, very different world now. And what Shaun was mentioning about understanding this terminology isn't necessary just because an agent needs to. The problem is you're not going to have clients left after long if you're not able to speak to them about this topic. Because if more agents around you, and remember, I do these workshops very, very often. Sapin does these workshops very often, where we bring agents in the room and we have conversations with them about how to speak the investor language. A lot of agents are themselves investors. So if you don't learn this, very soon, you're going to be approached by someone looking to invest in a property. You're going to say the wrong thing, and I can almost promise you they're going to walk away from you. And they're not going to be able to deal with you because you weren't able to speak that language. So very important to educate yourself and upskill yourself. So investor mindset. For starters, it's a business, not a home. That's what I said that's what I said when I started. Investors don't look at a property and admire the color, admire the green grass, admire the swimming pool. That's not what they're doing there, right? They're looking at it as a business opportunity, the same way that you would look at a business opportunity. Look at Bitcoin. You don't buy Bitcoin because you like the color of the logo of Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency you're buying. You're buying it because you're being told that there's a possible return that comes associated with it, or there's a possible use for it. You're buying it because there's a monetary value. There's a future return. Same with property investors. So you cannot expect to have the same conversation with them that you would with a homeowner. It's two very, very different conversations. So what are the key drivers? So key drivers are things like cash flow. They're going to be asking about cash flow. I'll go through some of this terminology in a second. So what's cash flow? Cash flow is there money in my pocket at the end of the day? Simple. Is there money in my pocket at the end of the day? And it's not a difficult calculation, because just bear in mind, you know that there's often a bond that needs to be paid. You know that there's levies that need to be paid. You know the municipality needs to be paid, right? Now, if you're selling a property or you're renting a property out, you have to know that these things exist. And as it stands at the moment, even if you sell a property to a homeowner and you don't inform them that there's levies and they're probably going to be 5,000 Rand a month because this body corporate is extreme and they expect to have gold-plated gates at the front entrance, unfortunately, that homeowner is actually going to be upset with you that you haven't properly advised them. So things like this are intuitive. You already have that information. You should already have that information. So how do you calculate cash flow? Put it all together. What comes in, what goes out, what's left over? Simple. Is the investor going to get money in his pocket at the end of the day? Now, there's a lot around cash flow that I can chat to you about, but that is advanced. So things like using certain tax deductions to increase certain cash flow and tax efficiency at the end of the day. We don't need to worry about that right now, because that's when you go from here to here. The point is, though, that you need to be having the conversation here right now. So cash flow, capital appreciation. Everyone should know what capital appreciation is. Is there value in this property over time? Do we think that the value tomorrow is going to be different to the value today, right? Funny thing about capital appreciation is it's also not just a thumbs up. So you might be looking at me now going, yes, that's fantastic, but property values haven't really gone up. No one can ever tell if they go up. So what am I going to be telling an investor? That there's great prospect of appreciation? I don't know if there is. Right? Fair enough. I mean, there are ways of checking out certain areas and seeing that, they're intensifying, that there's a lot of commercialization happening. So there are ways, but even if you can't see into the future and tell someone that the property is going to go up in value, remember there are things like forced appreciation. Forced appreciation means, can this person install something on the property that is going to increase its value, right? And again, we don't need to get complicated, but think about it from this perspective. If you have a flat in the inner city and you replace the kitchen counter with granite, right? Now, the question is, if the property was worth 400,000 Rand and whatever, let's say you spent 100,000 Rand on granite that you installed all over the place. Now, the property was worth 400. You spent 100. Does that mean that all of a sudden you've appreciated this property to 500,000 Rand? Because you've spent 100,000. So maths-wise, you're saying 400 plus 100 equals 500, right? Now, that's not how value works, because this 100,000 Rand that you spent on something that people that buy in the inner city have no interest in does not add value. And that's one thing that we need to understand when speaking to investors. What is value? Adding 100,000 Rand of worthless material to a very entry-level property is not going to increase its value. It will more than likely keep its value exactly where it was, right? No one would pay extra, maybe a little bit extra. It'll probably raise it by 5,000, 10,000 Rand, but certainly not 100,000 Rand. Whereas the same thing done in a high-end property somewhere could actually increase it by more than what you spent. So that 100,000 Rand could give the property such an image that people are willing to pay 200, 300,000 Rand. Same thing with like landscaping, right? If you're selling a home to someone, lifestyle choices, exactly the same thing. So when it comes to forced appreciation, there are certain things you can do in the property that increases its value. And one such example is things like zoning, right? If you were to densify the use of the property, you might very well find that you're increasing its value because now it's got more functions and more uses. And when I go into some of the terminology, I'll touch on these concepts. So just bear it in mind. There's things you can do to a property to force its value up. If you add value, the correct value, you might, or if you add the correct thing, you're going to find that you might actually get double the value. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. Tax efficiency, again, this starts getting very complicated in advance. It's not, we don't have enough time in an hour to discuss it. All you need to understand, because people will come to you very often, especially in the residential space, they'll come to you asking you about things like Section 13(6), right? Now, what you need to understand about these is, so Section 13(6), for example, just to touch on it, it's basically something where our government has gone, you know what, we need to incentivize people to buy a property in South Africa, not property just to live in, but good, decent property, new property, in fact, that they can rent out to people. Why? Because we have a housing crisis. There's a shortage. In fact, the lower the value of the property, the better, because affordable housing, the government will incentivize you more. But you know what? It'll incentivize you for any sort of housing, as long as it's new housing. And what they will actually do is, if a person in South Africa, a resident, owns 5 properties, and in these 5 properties, there's new properties. There's other rules as well. I'm just going through the most standard of these. But in principle, 5 new properties, right? Or within these 5, there's new properties. On those new properties, the owners get a deduction. So basically, it's called an allowance. And what this does is it allows you to deduct a certain amount from your taxable income. So the same way that you would deduct expenses in your business, as an example, exactly the same thing with Section 13(6). So on the most basic level, it'll let you deduct 5% per year over 20 years, being the value of the actual structures on the land. So not on the land itself, but the structures on the land, and they've got a way of calculating it. But long story short, what that means is that if a person has cash flow, like we discussed, and they need to pay tax on said cash flow, this allowance actually allows them to reduce the taxable income, which will actually give them a little bit more cash flow. So some people mistakenly, however, have tried to sell investment properties on the premise of using this deduction in order to make a property cash flow positive. I don't agree in that. But that's just an ethical thing for me going, you don't base an investment on a tax deduction, especially a tax deduction that might be done away with after some time, but they decided to. And in fairness, mathematically, there's cash flow, but it's not something that I would suggest people look at. But again, you need to understand that language. So things like Section 13.6. The person comes to you and says, oh, but can we make use of 13.6? You need to understand it. You need to be able to have a conversation. Like I said, unfortunately, an hour, I can't go through everything with you, but at least now you know that it exists. You know that it's a tax deduction. You know that at minimum, it could be 5%. There are higher ones for affordable housing. And you know that it could take a property from poor cash flow or no cash flow to being cash flow positive, because at the end of the year, you pay less tax. And so if you calculate that and you provision that over the 12 months prior, you'll find that you're obviously, making a little bit extra, because obviously you want to provision your cash flow and your tax that you need to pay. So that's just the suggestion. Risk management. All of you should know about risk management. I'll actually leave that to Shaun. He obviously understands risk management tremendously well. They're the same basic principles apply, but as a leasing agent, remember, again, there's a difference, because a property investor is going to want to factor in the risk management into its budget and its affairs and its cash flow. So again, when you start speaking about things like cash flow, we're like, cash flow, oh, it's just money. Well, no, it's not, because a cash flow done properly, right? Bearing in mind that you want to actually provision certain amounts, because you don't just get 10,000 Rand and I can use 10,000 Rand and it's all good. Because at the end of the year, if out of that 10,000 Rand, you have to pay 4,000 Rand to SARS, at the end of the year, you're not going to have much cash flow. So you need to look at the cash flow. There's monthly cash flow, and then at the end of the year, there's ultimately like a total cash flow. And things like maintenance, you need to factor this in mind. So you can't just say, I've got 10,000 Rand. Yes, it's a great property. I'm doing fantastic. Factor in that there's going to be those repairs. Is it a whole old house, right? What do we think the provision for repairs is going to be? Is it a single let or a multi-let? Because the more the tenants, the more likely there's going to be maintenance required and repairs required. Factor in a percentage. What's a decent percentage to factor in when having a conversation with the landlord, when he goes, oh, you're right, it's a fantastic deal. I get 10,000 Rand in my pocket. It's your job. And honestly, you need to be open and upfront, because landlords will appreciate this. It's your job to say, yeah, but just remember that it's an older house. These things haven't been repaired. I reckon that every month we put 10,000 Rand aside and we keep it. So what Shaun was telling you is I run many businesses. So there's BSA Law, there's Intergen, there's Letsand, there's Precision, there's Buzz, there's plenty of things. One of those businesses is actually a letting agency, but very specialized letting agency for investors. And we actually keep money aside. We don't let them take it. So every month we have to have a certain amount, because we know that anything could happen tomorrow. And if we don't fix it, it's not one tenant we're fighting with. We're fighting with 20 tenants over the gate being broken. And the issues are tremendous, because one person walks in there and there's 5 break-ins. So we have to mitigate our risk as a letting agent by ensuring that we've got the cash. And when we started this business, and I know Shaun won't like this, when we started this business, because we're trying to make things work, we landed up cash flowing our clients just to make sure that things worked, because things had to be done so quickly, and we had to like put together these concepts and go, you know what, we actually need to keep their money back, because we can't keep paying for the gate to be fixed and then going and begging the landlord to pay us back. So it's just, I mean, this is just speaking from experience. You need to understand that there is repairs, there's maintenance, these need to be factored in, and these are key drivers when you're selling a property to someone, or you're selling the idea of managing the property on behalf of an investor. Sorry, Shaun, if I am speaking a lot, but if you ever want to jump in, you can just let me know.
Well, I'm actually letting you speak a lot because for a number of reasons. Point number one, I have this cold I can't get rid of, and I'm on my third set of antibiotics. So I tend to cough if I speak too much.
No
I'm
worries.
enjoying learning things. I didn't want to disturb that much. I know, very, very unlike me. But something that I've picked up, and maybe we can just unpack this a little bit. The investor's intention, their purpose is for I know this is going to sound really stupid and simplistic, is for investment. So they are not looking at the nice to have. They don't care if they want to live there or not. It's essentially a business they're looking at purchasing, and they're looking at it that way.
Yeah.
You were talking now about the maintenance of fixing the gates and all those things, and whether I like something or not is totally irrelevant to anything. Just putting that out there. But one of the trainings I was doing yesterday was maintenance management with a national company. And we talked about having the authority, having a discretion to be able to fix things. Because one of the battles that agents have with, and I'm going to use the word landlords on purpose here, has to do with getting things fixed. There's that term called what you call it, the bad landlord. I can't remember. Oh, now I can't think of it. You see, I've got this cold. The slumlord sort of thing. I don't know why there's no slum ladies, but there's slumlords. So slumlords, for example, don't want to fix things. They just want money coming in. Investors, in my opinion and experience, and you're going to tell me if I'm right or wrong here, actually do not have a problem with maintaining the property, because what it does is it maintains their value, it increases their value, but more importantly, it increases the tenantability. It means they can get people in. So maybe that's something we can just expand on, how it's different. When you're talking about, bankrolling your investors and things, but you knew that they were going to pay you back. You knew that it was going to work because you were dealing with investors, not landlords.
So true. And I mean, one very good example of that is in the student accommodation space. In the past, we used to just assume students, you know what, find a place that digs, throw whatever in there, give them rooms, whether they have doors, whether they don't have doors, just like shove a whole bunch of students in there. They're going to wreck the place anyway. Who cares? As long as they pay, and I'll see them in a year, right? And it's so funny. So I had a conversation. I can't remember their name. Oh, really? So I can't remember their name, but it's a really interesting lady from Cape Town. And she's got an app.
Rieta.
No, not Rieta. So she does the management of the properties, but there's a specific app that works almost like an Airbnb for students that, where you get to rate your landlords and you get to find places. So you know that the places are of good quality. And then I had a conversation, for example, Mohammed Gardi. So he used to do valuations for Investec, and they used to deal with student accommodation at times. And the way that they valued student accommodation was so interesting, is that the proper investors dealing with student accommodation could make so much money because of the tenantability or appealability. So they were actually fighting battles to ensure that the quality of the Wi-Fi was great, because a student that didn't have that Wi-Fi would go somewhere else. There's security. So there were conversations around the need for increased security. And I just thought, you know what, they do the bare minimum. So increased security, now there's 3 padlocks. The access control, because what used to happen sometimes is people used to bring home boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever, and possible incidents used to ensue. So they actually had now access control and face recognition, and they used to know how many people came in. They used to have securities. If there were any issues, there were panic stations. It's like everything. So you couldn't get away. Somebody couldn't go in there and not be recognized. They would be recognized. They wouldn't be allowed in. There'd be security called, like a whole range of things. So it was quite something to realize that even in the student accommodation space, the space that you'd assume would probably be given the least amount of attention, it actually gets given so much attention. So imagine if student accommodation is sitting at that level right now, what do you think, as an example, your, just say middle class area, rentals are for family rentals, say 12,000, 15,000 Rand, they've got expectations. And when they go in there, they want to make sure that it's safe. They want to make sure that things work. They want to make sure that there's quick turnaround time. And the investors and landlords know this. They don't want to be left without a tenant. They don't want that 20-day business day cancellation coming in and now having to wait 3 months. And all they have is the deposit. So that cancellation comes in, and people know how to wangle it. They know that they're going to stay, send out notice, not pay the last month's rent, leave. And what's the worst that'll happen to them? Nothing. So a lot of people know this. So landlords are working on the psychological contract with a lot of these people to make sure that these people want to stay on the property. And to do this, you need to be able to manage the property. You, as a managing, so put yourself in the position of, think about it from this way, right? If I was running a business, so I'm running BSA Law, and I go, sure, you know what? I need someone to run the back office, buy all the things, make sure that there's a water cooler, the delivery guy comes in, like whatever, people time in, they clock out. If there's employee issues, they'll be here for me. Who do I hire? I hire a manager. Sometimes I even hire a CEO to take over that operations role. You as a letting agent are actually that, and you don't realize it. You are running their business for them. All they've done is they've invested in an asset. This asset can bring in returns, but to bring in the returns, it needs the right CEO. And you as a letting agent are actually that CEO. You should be able to tell which tenants. You should be able to tell what turnaround time do I need to have here? What money do I need to be? You should set those rules to the landlord to say that you do not feel comfortable and you will not be able to run his business properly if you do not have authority to do this, this, and this, because this property is going to require it. And you see that it's going to require it. And remember, at the end of the day, it's your headache. It's always going to be your headache. Because if you leave and you're like, whatever, man, I make my commission, it's a landlord's problem. When you lose the tenant, or if there's multiple tenants and they're calling you on a Sunday night, complaining about something being broken and you don't have the budget to fix it, that's your problem. Because now you're going to lose those tenants. You're going to have to find new tenants. It's going to be a nightmare for you. You're going to be fighting with the landlord, going to the property the next day. Shaun, between you and I, the thing is, if you don't understand how to run the business, it's a very different thing to just letting a property out. Having one tenant and there you go. And the tenant knows, oh, if the geyser breaks, I'll call the agent will call the landlord will call the agent will call me back. And when you're dealing with home lets or home rentals, honestly, sometimes it just feels like the agent is that in-between person. They give advice and they take calls and they translate the calls to the other people. This, with investments, it's a different ballgame. Over here, you're running the business. You're calling the shots. The landlord actually doesn't know what to do. They know less about this property and its tenants than you do. And that's kind of the position you want to be in, because that's when you start becoming indispensable.
You're making this sound very, very appealing, because the normal life of an agent, in my experience, and I know I'm a bit older now. Well, I'm actually quite old, but anyhow, the point is, it's an argument about things all the time, and it's almost like the landlord thinks that you're their gopher. And I'm no disrespect to landlords, okay? Because sometimes you'll say, but sorry, you can't do that. And we're talking about X, we're talking about that expertise. And they say, I'm telling you to, and it's my property, I'm paying you every month. That's not what you're talking about now. Because you're talking about somebody who wants to know how much it's going to cost, what's it going to do, what's going to happen if I don't do it, and we're talking a business thing, totally different. And without making sure that we don't miss something here, there's something else that I want to throw into the mix here, and you've been talking about it and referring to it, but you need to come out about it, né? And no, there's no big announcement coming, ladies and gentlemen. It's about, you talk about multiple people and this. It's a thing that's called multi-lets, okay?
Yes.
It is becoming more and more common these days, and I'm putting it out there because some people will know and some people won't, where we take a home, a property, and we rent it out to one set of people in terms of one lease agreement. Given the affordability crisis in the country, given the fact that things are so flippin' expensive, a lot of people can no longer, oh, you got a threat, can no longer actually afford to rent something. They don't want to have flatmates. Well, they might be okay with flatmates, but they don't want to take the responsibility because nobody can trust nobody anymore. No? So now they come to a point where they say, I actually only want to rent the one room and use the other places. I want that. I want you to give me the internet. I want you to do all of these things. That's a totally different concept. And that is something that I think you guys work with a lot. And I'm not very clever with.
It's look, you are right. So it is, there's two reasons why it's showing up a lot in South Africa. So the one reason is the affordability aspect. People need smaller spaces. They need a more condensation, some shared spaces, shared services, that sort of thing. Interestingly enough, I was invited to speak at Reside Summit this year, but around PPRA. Last year, I spoke about multifamily living. So it's also becoming a thing in all classes. So your middle class and your higher class, when it comes to condensed living. Now, this is a very strange concept because the idea can actually originate very easily from like your homeowners associations and body corporates, which we all know, right? It's, you still own your space, but you own it in a flat with shared security. But the sharing has actually become more and more, where now there's flats, for example, that are already furnished, right? So remember, one agent, as an example, one manager, if you look at Lanzon as an example, they manage the entire building. And some is furnished, some aren't furnished. Now there's shared spaces. So some of these things still have very, very nice spaces, but they like they call it, I think for I can't remember the name, but for young professionals. So they've got this concept for young professionals where they've barely got a kitchen, like a little kitchenette. There's a main area they can go if they really want to cook something. It's service, so there's a lady that comes in and cleans up, and it's basically a bed and like a little desk for them to work. Why? Because they leave early, they come home late. They don't have a family, so they just want in and out. So things like that do happen, and depending on what area an agent works in, it could be appealing. So some areas like your Santons, as an example, you might find that there's young professionals there, especially people that might have to drive far, people that might come from like township areas, as an example, and they need to find a place to stay. But they need it to be cheap or as cheap as possible, but it needs to be close enough. You can very easily find this range of accommodation. But remember, these are still lets. So you as an agent, this concept of, oh, there's a house, there's a lease agreement, thank you, enter, call me when there's a problem. The thing is that if you're lucky enough to find that, and that's your bread and butter, and these guys call you maybe every couple of months, if there's something wrong, great. The problem is there's a lot of letting agents out there. So if you don't understand the full market, you're going to be hoping that this business stays yours forever. And that's not necessarily always going to be the case. So yes, multi-lets, multi-family living, room letting, whatever. It's like shared spaces, common spaces, how to deal with them. Like, how do you manage multiple tenants and common spaces? And how do you deal with them complaining and phoning and going, the guy took the milk from the fridge? How do you deal with that? Do you have to deal with that? Now, have you added on now a new layer of, frustration to your life? Not necessarily, but you need to now understand the letting space is big. And if you don't embrace it, unfortunately, you may find sooner or later that you're going to be sitting in a very saturated, competitive environment looking for that old school letting that's very, very, very passive. But I mean, again, that's it's a business concept. You have to look at yourself as a business. You have to look at yourself as the value you provide, and then you need to go target a client and show them the value you can bring.
And it's actually something that the attendees can indicate to me whether they would like more training on that, because that's not the sort of training that I'm qualified to give. I know that from a very basic step.
Well,
But
you actually do. That's the thing. So it's just a matter. So like the training even my people do with you, the thing is you train on the very fundamentals
yes,
that underpin every single one of these lets. The question is, how does the agent actually apply these fundamentals in the different environments? A business concept is a business concept. As an example, a proper SOP is a proper SOP in any business. But if I'm running a law firm, I apply it one way. But if I'm running a guest house, I apply it a different way. But that underpinning is still there.
yeah. No, in that sense, yes, there's some practicalities where I think there are other experts available who can add value to the members, because obviously we're in the members only group. But I just wanted to talk about that concept because I know it's something that's becoming more and more popular for a lot of reasons. Security is another reason, obviously, all those sorts of things. And when you were talking, I could hear you were talking about multiple people and things like that. And I thought, let's just discuss that and unpack that, because in the old days, and I don't actually know how long ago the old days were anymore, I've forgotten. But in the old days, the only time we thought of things like that was there were either hippies and communes, no? That was the one way that they were doing it, but but I mean, that was all we thought of, or it was student accommodation. That's really the only multiple sort of living situations that really existed. And now it's become, as you say, a business. I mean, I'm in your SAP and WhatsApp group, so I see the questions coming in, and it's all about things like, but how many units can I put in here? How many separate spaces can I rent out, etc. And it's a big thing amongst investors. So it's clearly something that if we want to stay relevant in the rental management space or in the letting space, whatever you want to call it, we need to start upskilling on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so off the back of that, you're going to find, and I do want to touch on this because it's important concept, so you guys, when having conversations, or at least when starting to learn or upskill yourself, or if you have to go to Shaun or myself or whatever, we can at least start building on this. So very important concepts to remember is, in the past, a person used to buy a property, and the best outcome for them is to look at the value and say, well, you know what, I'm buying it and it's going to grow in value, so I'm happy. And sometimes they didn't actually overanalyze the value. They just accepted what they wanted. And as the years went by, things started becoming more and more analytical, right? Now, again, business. When you're buying shares, when you're buying businesses, when you're buying anything, we have certain metrics and indicators that give us information on whether a business is good or bad, right? And you'll see that, for example, in shares, it's the JSE, if you go look at the PE ratio, it's a price equity ratio where they want to try find out the different ratio between these concepts. And it all sounds very complicated, but it isn't, right? So when you take two numbers, you compare them or put them together into a ratio, and then you compare it against other investments. It's really just as simple as that. So sometimes it's just about looking at the numbers and figuring which numbers belong there, dividing them by each other. Now, why this works is because it almost gives you just an indicator. The indicator in itself doesn't mean anything. Those values mean something, but the indicators just allow you to very quickly go between different investments and compare. So in property, for example, we've got something that's called the yield, right? And you can use this concept. This concept is actually used across all investments, but I'm now for property specifically. So when we look at the yield, it's exactly that. The yield is, you take certain figures. So you're going to look at your annual rent. So it's only your gross income. So your annual rent from the property. And you divide, so your gross yield is annual rent divided by property value. Your net yield is annual rent less expenses divided by property value. That's obviously intuitive. So one is the full number, one just takes expenses into account. So when you're looking for yield, you need to determine whether the person's referring to gross or net, right? But in any case, the 8% doesn't really in itself mean anything, because it's not to say that you're getting 8% value in your pocket or you're getting 8% return. It's got nothing to do with the return. I'll explain to you in a second. It's simply a calculation, because this calculation can keep up to date. If the property value were to increase, so let's say I bought the property really low, and at that stage, the yield was massive, but for some reason, the property value has shot up, but the rent hasn't shot up, right? And now the yield has reduced. So you're dealing with lower rental, but very high property value, and you're getting a low yield. And you look around in that area and you see, but hold on, all these other properties that are here are getting far higher yields than this one. Something's wrong. It's an indicator. It lets you make a determination, because your investment today, comparatively, tomorrow might look different, and the day after, and the day after. So the yield is a consistent measurement that you can apply to look at the properties around your properties in other areas to see what yields they're making. Because if you're getting an 8, but you know that if you buy there, you're getting a 12, why would you go for an 8, right? That's a yield. So when you speak to investors, especially selling investment properties, you need to have an understanding of this. And an investor, obviously, when they come to you and they want to rent the property out, the basic fundamental calculation in a yield is the annual rent. So they're going to come to you with a figure, and they're going to say, this is how I did my calculation. I expect a yield of 8%. Now, you better understand as an agent that you have to now sit and advise and be able to have a conversation with an investor to explain to him that he might not be getting his yield, because his calculation, what he thought gross rent was going to be, or what he thought expenses were going to be, isn't right. And unfortunately, miscalculating is going to give a low yield. And if he wants a higher yield, he might need to do something else with the property, or he might consider selling the property because you've got a better property in your books that you could give him that has a higher yield. So just understand this concept. Next to it, you're going to see return on investment. Return on investment, very similar concept to yield, except it's not based on value of the property. It's based on money put in, right? Now, a lot of people would ask and go, oh, same thing. So I bought the property for $1 million, that's property value. I put $1 million in, it's the same thing. Either way, it's $1 million. Not necessarily. So number one, remember, your yield can be calculated year on year. So if your value goes up tomorrow, it's not that you put in 1.1, you put in 1, but next year it's 1.1. You still want to calculate your yield, because you still want to know that you have the best investment in your hand. And you want to compare that year by year. A return on investment is an internal calculation for yourself. And sometimes this is more important than yield, because the reality is, if you're able to get something below market value, so let's say the yield was 8% on R1 million property value, but let's say, for example, on a return on investment, you only actually put in 300,000 Rand cash, right? Say, for example, you use the bank to finance the rest, or you got the property at a really good bargain. In theory, right, because you only put in that amount, this is basically a comparison for yourself to say, if I had to put money in the bank, right, and I get X%, if I had to invest in shares and I get an average of a 15% return, if I have to invest in RSA retail bonds and I get whatever it is now, maybe 12% fixed return. But if I invest in this property and I get rental of 120, my expenses are 40,000, and I only had to put in 300,000 Rand cash. And obviously in this calculation, you're going to want to take bond payments and interest into account so that you understand the cash flowing from it, but you understand that your physical cash might actually be earning you 26% return on investment, because that's the money that you put in. And obviously you deduct the expenses from it, so you have an understanding on what are you getting out for the money that you put in. So cash for cash. You're not spending a cent more. It's what am I getting out of an investment for the money that I've put in year on year. So that's a return on investment. So the very, very, very important concepts. Yield is property focused. ROI is investor focused. Other concepts, cap rate. If you guys are dealing with commercial properties and you do commercial lets, very important to understand the cap rate concept, because it's how you value commercial properties. Commercial properties are valued by looking at your net operating income. So again, it's almost like rent less expenses. Net operating income divided by the market value of the property, right? Now, this gives you a figure. Now, if you want to calculate the actual value of the property, that figure is what's going to guide you in figuring out how much this commercial property is actually worth. So you need to understand what the cap rate is and how to calculate the cap rate, and then you need to multiply. You're going to end up multiplying the cap rate against the net operating income. So there's a calculation that you need to understand. I'm not going to go into detail on it now. You just need to understand the term. So what is a cap rate? How do you get it? Cap rates, unfortunately, are often very difficult to get, because to calculate the cap rate, you need to understand the market value of the property. To know the market value of the property, you need to understand the cap rate. So what people do this for you. So there's a lot of economists and analysts that go out to market and they do comparisons on areas in the commercial space, and they're able to calculate the cap rates for those particular areas. And this cap rate is what you then use as an agent to basically calculate the value by looking at the net operating income and calculating it against the cap rate and getting that value. So very important to understand, number one, that commercial properties are valued using cap rates. Number two, your agency should know where to find them. So normally things like roads, as an example, would be a place that you can find the specific cap rates for the specific areas. And number three, you need to understand how to get the net operating income divided by the cap rate, right? And then it should equal the value of the property. So again, I'm not going to go into the specific calculations now. It's just something that you understand when it comes to commercial property valuation. Why it's important in the letting space? Because of the net operating income. Again, it comes down to how much money are you able to bring in rentals in order to be able to do the calculation and value the property. Your commercial investors are going to want to know this. And the funny thing is with things like commercial valuations is even residential properties, as they stand at the moment, single residential properties are still valued on a comparative valuation model. So you look at the property next door. But as we start developing these very unique concepts where there's multiple people living on a property or student accommodation, you no longer use the same valuation methodologies as you'd use for one single home, because now it's not about the home. I mean, the home could look the same. One could have 4 bedrooms, the other one has 4 bedrooms. But that one is zoned differently. That one is constructed to be able to cater for 3 families. So the income on that one is a lot higher. And I was speaking to a valuer recently where he actually showed this concept in a property in an old area that's a house. And he took this house and he compared it to other houses in that area that were the same size, and he got to a value of about 1.7. But when he took the net operating income over the cap rate, he actually got to a value of about 2.2 million rand. And that is the value of the property. It was running as a little office. It was zoned to be run as that office. And the people were totally justified in selling it for that amount of money because that was the potential income that this property could bring in. So just things to think about. Cap rate and that sort of valuation style you're going to come more and more across it when it comes to accommodation, no question. I did discuss cash flow already. People might speak to you about things like leveraging. Please understand leveraging is using other people's money. So it's typically a situation where an investor wants to avoid putting in his own money, wants his ROI to be very big. So he wants to see if through the income, he can actually service debt. And if he can service debt and he puts in the minimum amount of money possible, he has a greater ROI. So this is where you start playing with how much money you put in versus how much money you borrow or get from a bank or get from a private investor, whatever it is. Exit strategy. Exit strategies you're also going to hear a lot about. This is backup plans. I buy a property because I want to let it out. But if I don't make enough money, I might want to flip it. Flipping means I'm going to sell it, but I'm going to make a bit more. I'm going to sell it for higher, so I'm going to make money in the sale. Refinance. So some people will finance the property at a certain amount, take it back to the bank like 1 year later, and raise more money because they got more. The bank sees more value in the property, so they're able to raise R1 million more after 1 year simply because of the value that was added to the property. And this happens quite often, where you can buy a property, get a loan. Let's say you buy the property, the loan's for R1 million, you pay R1 million, but you know that the property is going to be worth 2 million rand as long as you do 500,000 rand worth of works. You do the 500,000 rand worth of works, you go knock on the bank's door 1 year later, and you ask the bank for 2 million rand. And that basically means that you refinance and you get 500,000 in your pocket, which is the difference. It's the equity difference, and the 500,000 rand to pay back the amounts that you spent on like renovating the property. So a lot of guys do that, and they raise extra capital and they go buy more properties. Invest and hold. Obviously, you just hang on to the property. Repurpose. We get that a lot nowadays. A person buys a flat, they decide they want it as an Airbnb, or a person buys a house, they decide they want it as student accommodation. A whole range of repurposing takes place. You can repurpose from residential to commercial. I mean, you'll see now, even in the Sandton areas, you're seeing a lot of repurposing from commercial to residential. That's happening a lot now. So that's also exit strategies. It's backup plans. So when people execute on a backup plan. And then tax talk I did discuss section 13(6) deductions. I'm not going to discuss 42 now because that in itself is probably a 2-hour conversation. But this is basically restructuring. It's when an investor wants to move a property from his own name into one of these structures, maybe a company or a group or something like that he's still involved in. It's an internal restructuring. So if you hear section 42, just call Bruno. It's one of those. It gets interesting. Yeah, and I mean, so Shaun, I'm sure that we can also make these slides available. So this I don't really need to go through. This I just thought was relevant information. I mean, we've already really discussed it. So I think it's just a little checklist that agents can go through and say, sure, you know what, when I approach a potential landlord, I should understand that this is what they want and this is what they don't want.
You're almost talking about going back to one of the terminologies you used. This is helping people run their businesses. Okay, this is I know it's a letting agent, I know it's a rental agent, it's whatever we traditionally call it. But I think the big difference is somebody's coming to you who's essentially wanting help in running their business, and that's really what it. And I think that was quite important that came up in my mind when you put it that way. And I thought, yes, this is different. This is almost like having a manager or a co-manager or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I couldn't agree more. And if you approach an investor with confidence, and he's confident that you know how to run his business, he'll give you his business. If you approach him and you subordinate yourself to his way of thinking, then you're always just going to be following instructions. And if that's what you're good with, that's what you're good with. But I can assure you, it's more of a headache because the landlords don't know what they're doing, and they're going to question you every step of the way, and it's going to be a nightmare. And every time you say, we need to do this, oh, but do we need to do this? And as soon as they ask that, you know that they don't have confidence, or they're questioning you. They're questioning your ability. I want an agent that tells me what to do, and I'm like, oh crap, okay. Like, I negotiate with the agent, but is there anything we can do cheaper? And hope that the agent comes up with something. But honestly, when I speak to people in that let's say in business, I tell them straight, this is what needs to be done. There's no question about it. So you've got two choices. You can get your own guy to do it, or we do it for you, but it can't not be done. This isn't optional. And this is what we want, and we need it by next week, or all hell's going to break loose, and we'll hand the property back to you, because we can't manage something if you're not going to take care of it.
Something I mentioned yesterday, or it came up in my mind yesterday while we were talking about maintenance management. And there's lots of people still out there, because traditionally, certain things happened a certain way, and you need to get the landlord's permission. And I just came up with a concept, and it sounds so trite when you say it, but it was like, okay, so you want me to take care of your 3 million rand property and collect 70,000 or 80,000 rand a month in rental. You happy with me vetting those tenants and following my considerations? But I can't even go and fix something for 250 rand. I'm sorry, but I don't think we're a match. I don't think that you trust me. I understand there's scalums out there. I understand there's people that steal people's money. We can deal with that as a separate issue. But it's positioning yourself, and a thing I say often is set the relationship up from the start the way you want it to be. And I'm intentional when I say set it up, because we set those standards. We, from the start, explain where our roles are. And if it doesn't match your expectation, don't just take on business because you need to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt too much, because I know you have to go, because you are always rushing everywhere. You even listen to voice notes on 1.5. I know that too. So I want to give you a chance to wrap it up, but I'm finding there's a totally different look than what we've taken before, and I'm really, really excited.
Sure. No, absolutely. No. And I mean, you're not interrupting at all. I think it's important to merge all these worlds together and get those insights. Otherwise, what are we doing? So I've got basically the last slide that I spoke about was just about tailoring the pitch. So I know that you'd mentioned at a stage that it's about having the conversation. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it right at the beginning about, they look at it as a business. They don't want to know that it's pretty. And I mentioned it as well. It's not about the colors, it's not about the swimming pool, it's not about the green grass. So if you're speaking to someone that's an investor, just kind of understand that they want the numbers. It's quite simple. And the more you understand these numbers, the more impressed they're going to be, because it doesn't help testing it out. Oh yeah, no, it's a 2-bed. And then all of a sudden you realize, hold on, they actually just want to know that this amount of money can be made from it. When I'm advising them, I want to tell them what the rent is, what the costs are, what the maintenance expectation is, and hell, throw in a yield there just for good measure. And I can promise you, you're going to win over their business very, very quickly. So obviously, higher cash flow, high versus higher growth is also conversations you need to have. I find this a lot in the investment space when you can't justify higher cash flow. There's a lot of properties that you buy that don't have great cash flow where you can justify high growth. To have an understanding of this, because if an investor comes in and he's speaking about needing this higher cash flow, you can have the conversation and say, look, but the high growth is also important. You need to weigh up the two. Have you measured your return on growth and not just the cash flow? Me personally, I'm more of the cash flow guy. So I don't know where the growth is going to go. But you need to have a good understanding of both these concepts so that at least investors know there might be some growth. So even though the cash flow is not great at the moment, they're going to hang on to it because there's going to be a new shopping center or a school that's going to open up in front of the road or something. What turns them off? Emotional selling doesn't help. You just lose credibility in their eyes. Over promising, if they know, like never vacant. A proper investor would know that's never the case. So you might have a conversation around that. There hasn't been vacancies in a while because of X, Y, and Z. The leases keep getting renewed, but there's always a reason for it. If the leases keep getting renewed, either it's an incredible place that costs a fortune because your upkeep is huge, or your rent is too low, right? But if you're dealing with multi-lets and there's no vacancies, something's weird. Something's very strange. And you need to identify that and go, yes, but it's because we offer them free cleaning services and all the Wi-Fi in the world that no one else does. Then you start kind of pinpointing, oh, you're more appealing, but does it make sense financially? No tax finance awareness, at least know the keywords, at least be able to understand what they're speaking about when you say yields, ROIs, even Section 13 SECs, cash flows, all of that. A slow response, I think that's a normal business frustration. So investors do typically tend to be a bit more impatient. I think it's because they want answers faster and they realize there's an array of service providers out there willing to provide a service. So your competition is also quite high. It's not the random person who has a home that drives by, sees your sign and goes, oh, let me call those guys. I might need an agent. Let me call one. These investors, they buy, they know, they spread it out across multiple agencies. They see what rent they can get. And unless you've got a relationship with them, trust me, you're not the only one they've contacted. So the longer it takes for you to call them back, the lower the chance that you're going to get any sort of feedback or business from them. But yeah, I think from my side, Shaun, if your members want this, yeah, I can chat to you later and I can just put it in a version for you and send it through to you. And they can at least just have it as a little booklet for themselves.
If it could be like a PDF, then I can make it available as a download in the library where we put our recordings. I will also put Bruno's contact details, or Bruno, if there's somebody else, I can liaise with you afterwards. If there's somebody else that would be the first point of contact, maybe Mongizi or something, we can arrange that like we normally do. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you, Bruno, for joining us today. I'm sorry for the hiccups in the beginning. I'm somehow I changed the setting on the Silly Mac thingy. And I think that ever since that setting changed, my Mac don't want to always listen to my keyboard. So I don't know if that's a problem. I'll check it out later. I had no problems beforehand. But thank you so much. I notice it's been very, very quiet in the chat. And I think that is an indication when you are raising awareness. Now it's often a matter of, oh wow, I need to move with the times. Oh wow. But thank you so much, Bruno. I know we've run over time. Thank you so much for your time. I'll see on the members' feedback, and I think we might almost make this Investors 101 and then maybe go to an Investors 102, 103 with time in the members portal. because I think that's important. One thing that I want to say, share with the members is you've invited me to a SAPN event, well, more than one now. Once Andrew, even on the way to the airport, made me present at one. But anyhow, so these things happen when you get involved with these investor people, and they can be a little crazy. But what I noticed at that event was it's worthwhile for agents who want to get involved in that space to join and I'm not trying to sell your membership, to join an organization like SAPN or go to an event like they have. I must admit, I felt like a fish out of water. But all of a sudden you hear people talking about concepts you've never heard of before, and you become aware of them. So when somebody mentions it, and then you got me on some other panel, and there was these investors coming and talking, and oh no, I went and I bought this one for 50 million and blah blah blah, and it puts 275 flats on the top and blah. And you just realize that, you know what? I'm living in a cocoon. Let's open up our vision and think to ourselves, imagine the difference in our business, or are there business opportunities for us in that space, doing what we do well? Sorry, that was a mouthful, but I think that is really key, and it really does. It blows your mind and it opens up possibilities, and you might think totally different about where you want to go with your business. But thank you, Bruno. It was a long thank you, but I must admit it was a mind blow. It really, it was things I thought I didn't even know people do this.
No, it is. It is. It's like the investment world, and the beauty behind the investment world is it'll never stop. It's a very competitive environment. So if you're into learning and taking in as much as possible, it's the perfect space to be in, because there's always a question that you don't have the answer to. And I know for people like you and me, that's stimulating. Like I hate actually repeating the same thing over and over. I want to be challenged. I want there to be something complicated that I need to go deep dive into. And the investor world is exactly that. There's always something new. There's always a new strategy. There's always a plan that the guy has. Yeah. So it's fun.
Another side, and this is probably, I don't know if this is a backhanded compliment or what, I don't know. Hopefully I'm not saying the wrong thing, but the other part is, in our other business, the family home that has now become a rental property, mommy's in the retirement village, etc., etc. There's a lot of huggy, kissy. So business investors are easy. It's like, oh, yes, now why are you calling me about that tap? Just fix it, because otherwise the tenant's going to want to leave. Sometimes that's an easier part. Other people like the huggy, kissy. I'm quite happy with no huggy, kissy. So it really, it's a different environment.
It's true. Very true. Very true.
But let me let you go. I know you're probably already almost packed up and in the car. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing everything. And we will be in touch. I'll talk to you soon, because we've got a joint something on the 9th of
Tuesday. Yeah, not Tuesday. Yeah.
I think it's a Tuesday the 9th. But we'll get the marketing going with that. But thank you, Bruno. Have a great day.
Thanks.
And have a good weekend. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.